Hello again, everybody. Jim Hickey at Bass Fishing Tips on Twitter, coming back to you with another quick video. This time in response to a question that's been asked quite a bit on what are your favorite baits or fallback bait during the season, the fall season. And first of all, I want to point out, I'd like to thank the folks at New Pro Products, Judy et al., for sending me this cool little hat. I love it. Love their VT2 live well enhancement system as well. Something you better got to check out. But now that the commercial announcement is over, let's get back onto the subject at hand. First of all, as far as a fallback bait goes, during the fall, I actually have a fallback bait that I probably use most consistently throughout almost the entire year, and that's some sort of jig. It might be skirted, might not be skirted, might just have a grub on it, a tube, a crawfish body, something along those lines. And ultimately, if things are really tough, it's really, the cold water period, it'll be a hair jig of some sort, maybe with or without a trailer. So that's my ultimate fallback bait, period. But beyond that, I do have some favorite fall baits that I go out with almost every time. And there's four basically that are almost set throughout the whole period, and then another three that I kind of swap in and out, depending on the lake that I'm going to and the conditions going on at that time. So, without further ado, let's get right into those. And of course, fall, you get bass up chasing bait, feeding up for the winter that's coming. So, through much of the fall season, topwaters can be particularly good. And although I've been known to throw a variety of topwaters, the one thing that's tied onto my rod each and every morning, as far as my initial topwater bait, a buzzbait. Okay, and the color pattern that I have in that buzzbait, probably more often than not, it's either going to be white or chartreuse, with or without a painted blade. Sometimes it might have a nickel or gold blade. If there's something that I feel is more specific, I'm going to a place that has a lot of golden shiners or a lot of perch, then I might go to one of those patterns instead. But number one, the buzzbait. Number two, okay, once we get away from the topwater bite, I'm going to go to one of my all-time lures, favorite lures, period, and that's a spinnerbait of some sort or another. This particular spinnerbait is one of the not Strike King, excuse me, Santone lures. I don't own any Strike King spinnerbaits, as a matter of fact. Spinnerbaits. And I recently got this and have been holding on to it and figured it might be a great fallback bait to go, particularly in stained water. Kind of resembles a perch, has a little bit of gold in it. So, if you got some shiners around, it can help in that respect. But also, if just want a general spinnerbait for throwing around, this bait, which I think is their Toledo perch pattern, also has a little bit of crawfish, kind of imitation thing around here. So if I wanted to go dead dragging it across the bottom, a spinnerbait like that would be pretty cool. Now again, just like I mentioned with the buzzbaits, I will change up the color patterns. More often than not, I'll go with a whiter chartreuse, again with painted or non-painted blades. Also a perch pattern and a golden shiner pattern, depending on, again, the waters I'm fishing. The next bait, okay, number three, if you will, of my top four, a trap, okay, a lipless crankbait. This happens to be a Rattletrap. Actually, my go-to color in the Rattletrap, which might be contrary to most people, is black and gold. I don't know why. I just kind of throw this more than anything else. Something with a gold in it. Of course, another great coloration for this time of year would be either a perch pattern or a shad type pattern, okay, because there's a lot of those around at the same time. And again, I might change the actual color pattern that I have, again, depending on the lake that I'm going out and intending to fish. Now, the last guaranteed bait that I'll have rigged on my rod will be some sort of jig. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it could be a skirted jig, but more often than not, I'm going to set out with a non-skirted jig. Fall time of year, I'm going to want this thing on the bottom. I'm going to want it imitating crawfish. Okay, I have a nice little Mr. Twister pocket craw here. Okay, that I've nipped down a little bit. It's on I think it's a 3/8 ounce football head. Nice little weed guard on there. Really light wire, so I can fish it on light line if I want to. Has an ultra sharp Gamakatsu hook. all set and ready to go. Okay, and this kind of greenish brown with a green and brown flake and those orange craw tips on the craw arms can be an absolute killer this time of year around here. Now, will it always be a craw bait or always this type of a football jig? No. A lot of times it might be a darter head if I'm going to use a swimming presentation with something like a small swim bait, or a grub. It could be a grub, or an insert tube into it. Insert jig head into a tube, which is another lure that I'll use commonly this time of year. And sometimes I'll swim it. Sometimes I'll just let it work along the edge of weed lines that are still in existence and starting to die off, so you get that nice spiraling motion that are associated with tubes. And if I'm going to drag it on the bottom, I'm going to put a heavy jig head on it, and again go to a crawfish pattern with a tube as well. Okay, so those are the 4 baits that I have rigged all the time. And again, there's a little variation on what I might actually have at any given moment, even within those. But that gives you an idea of what my first 4 would be on, let's say, the 5 rods I go out with on any given day. What are going to be the next 3 that I kind of vary between? Well, particularly in the early to mid-fall, it'll be a square-bill crankbait. Okay, and it could be, this is a 1.5 size. It could go up to the 2.5 or easily. Actually, probably throw the 2.5 more than not during the fall of the season, fall time of year. The bait fish are really getting up to about that size, so I kind of want to mimic that. But a square bill, especially when you're fishing in from the bank out to 5, 6, 7 foot of water. And of course, if I'm going to fish deeper than that, then I'm going to go to a conventional crankbait. The next bait that I'd be out there ready to throw, suspending jerkbait. Okay. Again, we're getting to the time of year where bass are out there feeding heavily. They want a hearty meal. They got to stock up for the winter. You can, but sometimes they're sluggish because we got a lot of cold fronts coming through. I think here in the last 4 or 5 days we've had 3 cold fronts come through. So having a suspending jerkbait, something you can get down there, work, and basically almost leave in their face as you're working it, because this thing will kind of stay at that set depth. That's going to help catch more fish. And again, the color patterns that I use with this, here's one of my favorites for the fall, is a ghost, but I'll also go to a shad pattern or a goldfish pattern, again, depending on or perch pattern, whatever the case may be. And then the last bait of the 3 that I swap between, is a vibrating jig, a chatter type bait. Okay, this isn't a chatterbait, by the way. This is another company's. This happens to be a goldfish pattern. Kind of one of those things that I love to do. The trailers I use on these things most of the time, single tail grub or a double tail grub. If I want something with a little more action, I can go to a craw type bait that has the arms flapping back there. And if I want something that's really going to have a lot of thump to it, then I'll switch over to a swim bait. Okay, but a chatterbait is another bait that I'll use. And of course, one of the beauties of the chatterbait is that you can fish it shallow, you can fish it deep. This is a 3/8 size. Of course, you can go to heavier to get it down deep. You can basically drag it along the bottom. So, this is a goldfish pattern. If I wanted to use it to kind of imitate crawfish with that ticking noise that it makes, and sometimes that noise that the crawfish make as they're going across rocks, I'll go to something like a green pumpkin or some red type pattern or something like that with an appropriate type trailer on it. So chatterbaits are another cool bait. I also don't tend to hesitate where I throw these things, even around laydowns. And I know a lot of people get concerned about fishing chatterbaits around laydowns because basically you got nothing to really keep it from getting hung up. But one thing I'll do when I'm going to do that, I know I'm going to do that, is before I put the grub on, I'll take an old piece of a plastic worm and I'll thread the head up so that's going through the body, right? Basically from top to bottom. That would leave the worm sticking straight up, right? Then I can take that worm and hook it back and put it over the head to make it weedless once I get the grub on there. But once I get the worm up vertical, then I put the grub on, and then I'll put the worm over, put it like you're Texas rigging the hook almost, okay, in order to make this weedless, and that'll help when you're going to fish into dense cover and at least minimize the number of hang-ups you're going to get, even with a chatterbait, because A lot of people won't throw them into dense wood, and yet when you do that, it's a bait they usually don't see very often, so it can help you get a few more fish, especially some of those big, hefty fall bass that are out there um, getting ready to feed up for their winter doldrums, if you will. Okay, now, one last thing I want to mention before I leave. There's one other thing that I will add to my various baits. Not so much the hard baits, at least I've never done that very often, but with the bottom, well, with the chatterbait, if I'm going to work it along the bottom, with a spinnerbait, if I have a trailer on there and I'm going to work it along the bottom, or any type of jig I have, is I'm going to add some sort of scent. And this just happened to show up in the mail to me last night, in last night's mail. It's a scent put out by Fizzards, and if I open this thing up, take a whiff, oh yeah, smells nice and fishy. But you'll notice that, well, first of all, I can dump it upside down as it doesn't come running out. It's actually a hard paste that has the scent infused right into it. But even more importantly, it also has, it's loaded with air bubbles. And when it gets wet, it releases those air bubbles that also carries the scent along. So it kind of gives that constant scent trail that's out behind it with those little bubbles coming out of it. Now that's something I used to do a lot, especially in the fall when I'm dragging tubes on the bottom. Okay, and I always try to get a scent in my tube, but in the way I do this is I take a little piece of a sponge, soak it in the scent. Then I take some Alka-Seltzer because I wanted that bubble effect, and I drop it and force it down to the front of the tube. Put the little piece of sponge with a scent on it in front of it to kind of hold it in place, and that would be how I'd go about getting my bubbles and scent working together in the old days. Thank you, Fizzards, for putting this out there. Now, I'll be honest, like I said, I just got this. I haven't been out fishing yet. Here in the next few days, we'll get it out and see how it goes. I've seen it actually work and bubble. I'm looking forward to it, but I expect some great things from this. So, Fizzards, historically, I've used things like Smelly Jelly has been my go-to scent in the past. But now that Fizzards has come out with this bubbling scent, if it works, it'll be my scent that I go to. All right, that's it. That gives you an idea of those baits that I use during those fall days or during this time of season. Hope that gives you some insight. Again, for me, asking a question like that, what that bait is never easy because I always try to be adjust and adaptable to the conditions I'm faced with because my ultimate goal is to put more bass in the boat, especially those big gals. All right, be talking to you again soon. This is Jim Hickey at Bass Fishing Tips on Twitter. Have a wonderful day.